traces of the lives of our ancestors are etched on the landscape around us. Thousands of years of farming, travelling, living and dying can be read in our surroundings. Lying in the heart of Mid Wales, the region around Rhayader is rich in ancient history. New discoveries and ways of reading the landscape are gradually revealing more about our distant past. These treasures are precious and beautiful, but their true value lies in what they reveal about the people who created them, wore them, and ultimately gave them up.
The Llanwrthwl Torcs originate from the Bronze Age, a period in the past when people are settled and farming, and that period lasts from about 2400 BC up until about 700 BC. The Bronze Age peoples would have had a profound effect on the landscape here. They would have conducted a huge amount of clearance of the forestry that would have clothed these hills and would have reshaped it for agriculture with stock grazing and fields created for grain production.
During the early Bronze Age, the climate was warmer and drier, encouraging the spread of agriculture into the uplands.
And these stones are then erected to lay claim to this new fertile land by the social groups of the area. We can see that it is aligned quite nicely on another standing stone on an adjacent hill, Maen Serth.
These prominent stones are still visible in the landscape today, together with the burial monuments, the cairns, barrows and kists.
This is actually a Bronze Age kist burial, essentially a stone box.
Kists would have contained grave goods, such as weapons and ornaments, alongside cremated human remains.
Well, in the late Bronze Age, this landscape becomes a much more hostile place. The climate deteriorates, and this forces the withdrawal of the people who are farming here to the lower land.
It was during this period that the Llanwrthwl Torcs, following the move to the lowlands, were buried. Today, finding treasure is the stuff of legend, desire and dreams, but for two local lads, James in 1899 and John in 1954, it actually happened. In 1954, John was ploughing near Llanwrthwl.
My job was to take the stone out of the furrow and put it on one side. I took this one particular stone out of the furrow, and underneath this stone was shaly slate, and something made me move them, and I moved them, and then underneath were these, what I always thought was bed spring.
Did the Torcs look a mud colour when you first saw them?
Yes. They were, how can I say, they were exactly the same colour as the ground. Right? That I really cleaned them up a bit, and polished them on my trousers like that, and then found out that it was what colour they were, and that they looked like brass. Showed them to my boss, and that, and he didn't know what they were, and we looked at them and that, and then they were chucked on the, well, I might as well say they were actually chucked on the windowsill in the kitchen.
But sitting on the windowsill were artefacts more precious than John could have imagined.
But our housekeeper that we had at the time, they were looking after us, she was one hell of a ferocious woman, and she wanted her space on that windowsill back again.
John's boss decided to get a professional opinion, and the hoard was sent to the National Museum Wales in Cardiff.
Well, the Llanwrthwl hoard is a group of 4 gold Bronze Age Torcs that were discovered during the 1950s. One of the nice things about this hoard is the variety of techniques that were used to make them. We have one which is known as a flange twisted torque, two which are simple twisted wire, and then one which is plain. The twisted metalworking tradition is something that's distinctive just of this part of the Middle Bronze Age, about 3,200 years ago.
How did you feel when you were told the torcs were from the Bronze Age?
I suppose in a sense I felt quite elated, quite privileged to have found something that old.
How large were the torcs? Would they have fitted on your wrist?
Oh yes, yes. The smallest would have gone round my wrist there, and round there. And the bigger ones would have gone round my muscles there.
It's possible that these torcs were made using Welsh gold, but equally we know that there were Irish goldworking industries of this time. What we can say is that the person who made these torcs was extremely skilled.
The gold torcs were found in an area which had other Bronze Age sites in them. There are a couple of cairns, burial cairns, possibly within a few hundred metres. Now, it would suggest that where they were buried was an area that was of some importance to the local social group.
So the way in which they're buried suggests perhaps part of a religious practice, perhaps a contract with the gods of the time. Maybe the deal was in return for good harvest or the continuity of society at that time.
They would have been signs of considerable status. I don't think just anyone would have possessed items like these. They're bright, they've got considerable quantities of very high quality gold in them.
The hoard has a combined weight of 419 grams, created when gold was a rare and hard-won commodity.
These were good items to use as ways of distinguishing yourself within society.
I think it's quite possible that the people who are wearing these are clan leaders or perhaps religious individuals as well, leaders of the religious life perhaps, or the ritual life of the grouping at the time.
These societies existed a long time before coinage was ever invented. And so people had different ways of articulating value.
I can see these bracelets being worth many tens of cattle. I think cattle were probably the basis for what we think of as the economy of the time.
An inquest was called to establish whether the hoard was subject to the ancient law of treasure trove, and so decide who legally owned it, and, if it was declared treasure, the reward.
Courtroom was absolutely full. It was standing room only in there, as it was one of the biggest things to hit, biggest inquests at the time to hit mid-Wales.
Were you told how much money they were worth?
The director at the Museum of Wales, when he stood in the dock, because he had to stand in the dock, mind, and say that he was telling the truth, all right? And he actually said that the value of them was, he couldn't put really a price to them.
John was just 17 at the time of the discovery, earning £3 a week.
What I was awarded, £375, I could have bought a 3-bedroomed house with it. That was what the value of that money was then. Now my boss at the time told me, I don't want any of the money at all. I don't want one penny of it. Said, it's yours, you found it, so you keep it and you have it. But that's all I ask you to do is just share a little bit with the housekeeper and with your other workmen. And that's what I done. At a later date, I suppose I did realise what money was. I bought myself a car, as you do. You know, when you're a teenager, I bought myself an old car, and I had great fun with that.
Within 2 miles and 2 years of the Llanwrthwl hoard find, A Bronze Age ring, slightly older than the Torcs, was found on the bank of a stream.
The discovery of this ring, not very far away from the Llanwrthwl Torc hoard, adds a little more to the picture of Bronze Age metalworking in this part of Wales. We think it was a little bit older than the twisted torque techniques. Its simple style suggests that.
John's was not the only significant hoard discovered locally. One evening, after work in 1899, James Marston made a chance discovery.
He took the dog for a walk up onto CARAD, the western end of Gwastedyn Hill, and took an iron bar with him, hoping that he might disturb a fox and the dog could have a bit of extra exercise.
What age was your grandfather when he found the jewellery?
He was 20 years old. But by the time he was 20, he'd been working for 8 years. And he put his iron bar into a very narrow crack and prized it open a little bit, and he heard a strange noise, a sort of clinking noise, and so he opened the crack a bit further, and the jewellery just fell down in the crack, and he was able to pick it up. And he must have had a terrible shock.
Sheila's grandfather had stumbled upon a hoard of exquisite Roman jewellery, a striking gold neck ornament inset with multicoloured glass and stones, a sardonyx ring engraved with the tiny figure of an ant, and an exquisitely wrought golden bracelet.
What did the jewellery look like when he found it, and was it wrapped in anything?
It wasn't wrapped in anything, and it was broken into quite a few pieces, but it's all been restored and repaired now. And he might have thought they were gold, but I think perhaps he wouldn't have believed that they were gold.
It's fairly clear that these are very sophisticated objects. They're very beautifully made. We think that they were buried probably in the 2nd century AD. They're made of very high purity gold, and it's a decent quantity of gold. It's over 200 grams of gold. Very beautifully and finely worked and decorated.
It's funny to think that a jeweller 2,000 years ago could make something that a modern jeweller would really struggle to make.
The Romans arrive in the area very much as a military force. To conquer Wales really comes about because of its potential for harbouring rebels. Most famously Caratacus, of course, who flee the Roman army as it progresses westwards and set up base with some of the Welsh tribes.
Generations earlier, a more aggressive culture had emerged from the largely peaceful Bronze Age peoples. The Iron Age spawned an era of tribal conflicts and new technologies, but their warriors and hill forts proved no match for the vastly superior might of the Roman Empire.
What we see is the breakup of the landscape and the control of the landscape by the Romans via a network of forts linked by roads. We're on the corner of Amgueddfa, the Roman marching camp, quite a large camp in a bleak upland setting. I can imagine that devoid of trees as it is now in Roman times, with a garrison of about 4,000 troops stationed here.
It's likely that a time of strife and uncertainty led to the hoard being concealed.
Quite possible that that these things are buried for safekeeping, and then the individual who secreted them away was injured or killed in battle and was never able to return to recover them.
Increasingly, though, we are thinking that often these things are buried for religious reasons. These objects may have been an offering to a god in the hope of something good happening, or in thanks for something that's happened.
Or the jewels might have been intended as a gift to a valued friend, or to seal a pact with a hostile tribe.
We obviously can't know exactly why these objects were put there.
The High Sheriff of Radnorshire had got to hear of the find and became involved, and he advised James to send the jewellery to the British Museum. I think actually he sent it himself, and then received a reply from the Director of Antiquities, who did confirm that it was ancient Roman jewellery.
I imagine the Rhayader Jewels as actually belonging to a Roman person of some social standing.
We're talking about perhaps the wife of a high-ranking official, perhaps in the Roman administration, but it could possibly be someone locally who's an ally of the Roman administration.
British Museum expertise was called upon in 1899 to value this exceptional find. A figure of £75 was presented to the inquest as its monetary value, and the reward was set at £52.
Now, that should have gone to James, but I was brought up to understand that the local landowner then stepped in and said James was trespassing, he didn't have permission to be there, and therefore the reward should go to the landowner, and the landowner gave him the 5 shillings. I really don't know which of those is correct, but I've been brought up to understand it was 5 shillings.
The treasure has a much, much bigger value, and the bigger value is that it can tell us so much about people in the past.
He had a photograph taken pointing to the spot that he was supposed to have found the jewellery, but all the locals said that my grandfather wasn't stupid and he didn't take the press to the place where he'd actually found it. Whether he was pointing to the actual spot or not has been a matter for speculation in Rhayader ever since.
There are certain aspects of the Rhayader material which is interesting because they have elements of the design and also the way in which the objects were put together which might imply that it was made in Britain. Some examples of that is the use of enamelling, and this blue and green enamel is very much a provincial thing, something that you see on quite a lot of British objects. How rare and important is this assemblage? Well, firstly, there were not that many finds of Roman gold in Wales, so that gives it a rarity in itself. Also, this dates to a very early, relatively early period, 1st to 2nd century AD, and finds of jewellery, high status jewellery of this nature of that period, again, are really few and far between. These items compare well with stuff from all over the empire. These are very, very sophisticated in that sense. So it's not just national importance, it's also international importance.
And so these treasures, which glimmered unnoticed in the earth for millennia, have re-emerged to link our lives with those of our ancestors. They enthrall us with a beauty that transcends time and have taken their place in the great collections of our nation.
Is